So I'm really pleased to be here at Life Moves in Mountain View. This is a new homeless site that came up in about 5.5 months, 100 units, 124 folks, including very young children that are literally just moving in this week. It's part of our Homekey model in the state of California, our effort to address the issue of homelessness. But I'm really pleased to be here today with a guy who was just drafted the first round in the NFL and decided to do his draft party at a homeless shelter, because he experienced homelessness when he was a child all throughout the Bay Area. But Najee, I mean, imagine this gets very personal to you, because the people you see here, that was you not that many years ago, man.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing though. So it did at first get really personal for me, especially my first time really just speaking about situation that I've been in.
So what I opened this video with is a very wholesome video of Governor Gavin Newsom and a guy who was just drafted into the NFL, who actually experienced homelessness throughout his youth, talking about a program that Gavin Newsom has championed, a COVID-era program called Project Homekey that has been repurposed in order to provide permanent housing for the homeless, under the premise that essentially the state of California and local municipalities are going to identify motels, buy up those properties, and then convert those motels or hotels, for the most part, into permanent housing for the homeless. And according to Gavin Newsom, this has been an absolute game changer. In fact, you can go on YouTube and all over social media to find propaganda pieces about how successful this program actually is, many ribbon cutting ceremonies in order to celebrate its great success. However, color me a bit distrustful, as Gavin Newsom and the California state government have repeatedly in the past wasted money associated with homelessness, including $24 billion over a 5-year period, where they did not actually have receipts for how that money was spent. So what we're going to do today is look at an article that was written by a journalist. You may have heard of her at some point in time on this channel. Her name is Ana Kasparian. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that name, where she actually does original reporting on this specific project for an outlet called Real Clear Investigations. Again, the entire article will be linked in the description. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
After 12 months of renovation work, the city of Culver City welcomed the opening of Project Homekey, a new supportive housing project on Sepulveda Boulevard.
By revitalizing these two properties, we are helping to bring dozens of unhoused neighbors off the streets.
It's another step in the progress of solving homelessness, one unhoused neighbor at a time.
To our unhoused population, this is a way of building up trust again, building trust with an unhoused individual who, for whatever reason, felt that the system has failed them. Bringing them here, showing them that we have love and compassion for them and the services they need, I think is really a step in the right direction.
Again, it is actually pretty impressive how Gavin Newsom, who has been racked by controversy, can consistently find people to embrace his new government projects, even though, again, previous government projects around the issue of homelessness, going back decades, by the way, have been objectively failures. And by the way, homelessness has gone up since the period of time that this program has covered. But if we go to Anna's article, one of the things that we'll discover is that there are over 180,000 homeless people in the state of California. But Newsom, who appears to be preparing for a presidential bid in 2028, could make Homekey, which he calls a quote-unquote national model, a talking point in his campaign. The state claims that the program has created almost 16,000 permanent housing units that will serve 175,000 people. However, since the state does not track whether the people placed in new housing saw their lives improve or if they return to the streets, the program's effectiveness is unclear, according to a 2024 state auditor's report. Now, what Anna is referencing is this report right here, which will also be linked in the description. And by the way, Anna was nice enough to link that in her article, so I could just click right through it and examine it for itself. And you will be shocked to find out that even though Governor Gavin Newsom calls this homelessness program, Project Homekey, a national model for addressing the issue for his potential 2028 presidential campaign, when you examine the report, again produced by California's own state government, what they find out is, yeah, it's not cost effective compared to other programs, and I will quote you from the report so you could see that for yourself. The Joint Legislative Audit Committee requested an audit of the state's homelessness funding, including evaluation of 2 efforts undertaken by the state and 2 cities to monitor the cost effectiveness of such spending. spending. The following report, 2003-102.1, focuses primarily on the state's activities, in particular the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, while a separate report, 2023-101.2, details our findings and conclusions for two cities we reviewed, San Jose and San Diego. In general, this report concludes that the state must do more to assess cost effectiveness of its homelessness programs. The state lacks current information on the ongoing costs and outcomes of its homelessness programs because Cal ICH has not consistently tracked and evaluated the state's efforts to prevent and end homelessness.
No, we're not doing that. That's embarrassing.
And this, by the way, is a very common theme among government programs, specifically California government programs, which is beneath the glitz and glamour and the ribbon cutting ceremonies. When you look at the underbelly, what you end up finding is waste, massive fraud, and of course, abuse of taxpayer resources. But in addition to that, a failure to track the outcomes of the very people, the most vulnerable people that are supposed to be helped by these programs. Again, the scandal with the $24 billion in homeless funds is separate from this, about how they weren't tracking outcomes, how there was no real accounting for where all this money was spent. And yet, even post that scandal, we have another program that Gavin Newsom is still championing that has the very same issues. And again, they were just examining two cities when they were making these proclamations about California's lack of oversight, and this program on its own is over $3.7 billion, according to Anna's article. And by the way, members of the Los Angeles City Council have been blowing the whistle on this for a long time. Quote, "Our budget is bloated with homeless spending, a bottomless pit, and taxpayer boondoggle that doubles down on failure year after year," the Republican-turned-Democrat Los Angeles Councilwoman Tracy Parks said in a meeting in May. Quote, "Hundreds of millions of dollars on bridge homes and Homekeys and interim housing sites, and no one can even tell which ones are operational." Now, like I told you earlier, during the course of time of this particular program, homelessness has gone up, and according to Anna's article, it says that it is up by 20% over the 5 years that Homekey is in place, and that is 36,000 additional homeless people, again, as Gavin Newsom pushes what they're doing in California as a national model that we all need to replicate because it's so stunning and so beautiful and so brave.
The two repurposed and adjacent motels provide 73 new units of interim housing and permanent supportive housing. Each room provides a welcoming decoration with a focus on accessibility and comfort. The first tenants will arrive in October. The project's approach streamlines housing and social services. Exodus Recovery will oversee services at the locations, including meals, laundry services, as well as security on site. Residents will also have access to social services, including an on-site case manager, 24/7 health monitoring, and mental health clinicians.
But again, this program was sold on the idea that this is a new, efficient, quicker way in order to get people from homelessness into motels that have been converted into apartments, and it actually saves the taxpayer money. And by the way, based on the fact that we've seen that homeless apartments can run up near $1 million per unit when constructed by the state of California from scratch, it sounds like that makes a little bit of sense. However, when there's no oversight in a government program, what you ultimately end up discovering is that immense amounts of fraud can be committed, and a lot of the supposed savings that you were going to get by converting these motels have been lost due to the fact that people are stealing from the program. According to Anna's article, in one case, Cody Holmes, the former CFO of developer Shangri-La, I can't pronounce anything, Industries, allegedly falsified bank records to obtain $26 million in Homekey funds, only to siphon off more than $2 million to pay his own credit card bill. Now look, I know Caleb Hammer is currently being canceled by the left wing, but I think when you're running up credit card bills to the tune of $2 million, you might need to show up on financial audit rather than, actually be involved in integral government functions, because obviously you are in a disastrous situation. But the thing is, even if you're not directly stealing money from the taxpayer and using it for your own credit cards. As is pointed out by this article, it turns out that the program was kind of a scheme or a scam to begin with, and that is because, like many things that have been defrauded in our recent history, this started out as a COVID-era program that was fueled by federal money in order to make sure people were stabilized and, again, not getting sick during the course of the pandemic. Now, originally, the intention of this program was to make sure homeless people were not transmitting COVID to one another, based on the idea that they were living in enclosed encampments all over cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, but a City Journal investigation ended up discovering that many of these motel rooms that were crappy in every possible way, that were not being rented at all whatsoever due to the fact that, again, it was a poor time for tourism in the city of San Francisco during the pandemic, were actually costing the taxpayer double what it would cost to just rent homeless people a one-bedroom apartment. And again, that is $6,000 a month for those of you who are scoring at home. So again, we have a federal program that is funneling money in order to deal with consequences of the pandemic. We are supposedly trying to rent these people apartments, which at market rate would cost $3,000. Instead, we're renting them rooms in dilapidated motels at the cost of double that. And this is the basic inspiration or the framework that they used to build on in order to continue Homekey, which obviously was fraudulent and kind of scammy from the jump.
At what used to be the Avenue Hotel, currently Avenida, Homeless Communities was one of the recipients of some of the funding to convert this place into affordable housing.
Project Homekey is a partnership between the state and local jurisdictions. So in this case, it's the state and the county of Los Angeles, where we're pairing resources to acquire or purchase hotels and motels. So permanent supportive housing comes with wraparound services. So that's case management, that can be health, mental health support, all to ensure that the folks living in these units can live here permanently and retain their housing.
They were phasing out Project Roomkey to go to Project Homekey. And in that process, I was fortunate enough to get housing in one of the units. Now I'm able to do whatever, dream again, start all over, get grounded, be more assertive in my ideas and thinking, be more confident in myself. Everybody needs a second chance at housing. Everybody deserves a second chance at housing.
But of course, it didn't stop there. As many of you guys have heard, there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So obviously, this ended up transitioning into something that they were going to try to do more long term. And because voters approved yet another ballot initiative in order to secure a $6.4 billion bond for it, Homekey was allowed to continue. And this time, rather than renting the motels, what they were trying to do was buy them or buy conversion projects that were already in the works and basically convert that into permanent housing. Now, Anna ends up going over the fact that about 66% of the homeless are actually mentally ill. You have high rates of drug use and all sorts of other problems. Again, the full article should be read by you guys out there in the audience, linked in the description. However, this was not really accounted for, so a lot of these places ended up becoming dens of mental illness episodes and, of course, drug abuse and overdoses, which is really sad and unfortunate. But those were just the units that were occupied. In Los Angeles, for example, even though they were appropriated over $500 million, $550 million to be exact, and they bought 32 buildings that contained 2,157 rooms, it turns out that when they examined whether or not people were living in these rooms of this fancy new project, what they found out was that 71% of the rooms were completely empty. And by the way, for those of you who are counting at home, that breaks down to about $260,000 per room. And again, considering 70% of them were actually empty, you can imagine how it's basically 3 times that cost per occupied dwelling for, again, a program that Newsom promises as a national example. And that isn't even factoring in, of course, that California and these cities are using these funds to well overpay for these projects. The city of LA's housing authority used $48.9 million in Homekey money to acquire and complete complete a building that was under construction. Developer Haroni Investments was chosen to construct the 75,105 square foot building with 127 housing units. However, a similar project in the area would typically cost around $18.8 million, according to experts that spoke to local reporters. This means the city of Los Angeles overpaid by $30.1 million of your taxpayer money, which, by the way, represents a 165% increase in that particular price. But if that wasn't bad enough, it's about to get significantly worse. In June of 2025, a memo from LA Mayor Karen Bass's office estimated that the building would be completed later in the month. In August, city officials held a ribbon-cutting ceremony, even though the building was not yet finished. As of December, which is this month, LA's housing department website says the building is not yet built and there are no listings available for the units. Requests for comments from Bass's office have not been returned. Now, while Ana overall does a great job in this particular piece, she actually did not link the ribbon cutting ceremony for this apartment that, again, wasn't actually done when they did the opening ceremony for it. So I had to dig this up on my own, and I found the video for you guys, so I want to play that for you. Oh yeah, you feel it?
We're so excited to be at the grand opening of brand new affordable supportive housing community here in the heart of South LA.
3, 2, 1. Woo! Got it. Whoa, open that up. Cut that ribbon.
127 units that will welcome individuals that are exiting homelessness, thanks to a partnership between Link Housing, the City of LA, the Housing Authority, and the county.
It's always nice to get to the finish line and cut the ribbon. But more than that, every time you do one of these buildings, you talk to someone who has a story.
While I definitely agree it must feel great to get to the finish line and do the ribbon cutting ceremony, I guess it also feels just as good to do the ribbon cutting ceremony when you're not at the finish line, when the finish line is kind of nowhere in sight and you're celebrating a victory for a thing that you have not completed at all whatsoever. It's absolutely hilarious how this works and how politics are so similar across the country, because what politicians would rather do is have these ceremonies than solve actual problems, which is something that I often address whenever I'm talking about the New York City subway, whenever we don't do basic maintenance in order to keep the trains operating, and yet we have new glamorous stations that are built for over 2 times the cost that they should be built, and politicians are patting themselves on the back for the new thing that they have, even though, again, they're not addressing the actual issue. Because make no mistake about it, housing and homelessness is very serious in the state of California and across this nation. It is a problem that ends up reacting with mental illness, returning veterans. You also have issues with drug addiction and all sorts of other issues that combine and need to be addressed. But it's just way more fun to go out and cut yourself a ribbon on a property that the city completely overpaid on, ridiculously so. And this is why nothing ever gets solved. This is why nothing ever gets done. This is why Gavin Newsom is running on this program as a national model, even though, again, all of the data shows us it's not very effective, and they're not even tracking outcomes to determine if it's effective, because again, it's all about the feels. Remember in the beginning of this video when I showed you the guy who's drafted into the NFL and he decided, because he experienced homelessness, to have his party at one of these Homekey properties in order to celebrate the fight back against homelessness? That made you feel good, didn't it? That made you feel a little bit better about yourself, even though, again, nothing is actually getting done. And again, 71% of the units being purchased under this particular program aren't even occupied. So the homeless people that could be in them are still out on the streets.
But I mean, I slowly start to realize that, like, you know, me telling my story, it actually helps people who are in position that wasn't in position that I was. And it kind of gives them hope. Right. And it kind of, like, you know, gives them a better view of life and how they're going through it. So if I'm impacting the youth and impacting people who's been through my situation, they, you know, try to better themselves. Right. And that's really all that matters, you know. So at first it was kind of, you know, a little embarrassing, but then I started slowly realizing what the bigger picture was.
Tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you evicted multiple times. You had episodic incidents, right? Where you ended up just in family members' couches.
We've probably been evicted like two, 3 times. But when you get evicted the first time, it messes up a lot of stuff.
Look, I am so happy that that young man made it through to the other side, that he went through homelessness throughout his young life, and yet he got himself to the point where he was able to be drafted in the NFL, something that very few people in our entire society ever get to achieve and experience. But what I can't stand is that man right next to him, Gavin Newsom, talking down on him, smiling at him like he had a hand in this, when in reality, the program that he is promoting is taking advantage of stories like his in order to rip off people who don't have his natural talent, who aren't going to make it through to the NFL based on their own grit and determination, based on their own strength. Again, get a load of this. In addition to overspending and delays, there are allegations, or alizations as the supermayor would call them, of fraud.
False allegations and not facts.
One case involves homeless service provider Weingart Center Association using $27.3 million in Homekey grants to purchase a 76-unit senior living complex in LA, which it planned to convert into housing units with additional funding from the city. But federal prosecutors say the deal was shrouded in secrecy. Stephen Taylor, the real estate developer who sold the property to Weingart Center, used fake bank statements to obtain loans to buy the property for $11.2 million just months before flipping it for a $16.1 million markup. Taylor made no improvements or renovations to the building, and a clause in the contract ensured that his involvement would be kept a secret. While the property was in escrow, the Weingart Center submitted an application for additional Homekey funds. The application, according to prosecutors, made no mention of the pending sale involving Taylor. Bass allocated $20 million in city funding toward the project. You want to know how $24 billion in that other scandal ends up disappearing from these homeless departments? That is exactly how, right there. Here you have a guy who, again, knew that this property was being targeted by a group in order to participate in this particular program, so he decided to falsify bank records to make sure he obtained it first. He then flips the property, again, after doing nothing, after a couple of months, for $16 million more, money, by the way, that comes from grants from your tax dollars, to some group. He makes sure that that can't be disclosed to the public, and he walks away with the differential, again, making a killing. But for the fact that the federal prosecutors looked into it, nobody would have said anything about this, even though property records are public. Like, if you ever looked at houses as a hobby, you could find the last sale date on those websites because it's a matter of public record. And yet, because there was virtually no oversight of this program, nobody monitoring your money, because again, it's a successful program that again is being propped up with stories like the kid who got himself out of homelessness, who ended up making himself good enough to be in the NFL draft. You're just supposed to say, wow, it's all good in the hood, it's supporting the homeless, and honestly, you're probably lacking in compassion if you look into this any further. And that is one of the most shameful things about this. Now again, the full article will be linked in the description of this video. There are other scandals associated with it. I do thank Anna for actually doing this particular article, for diving deep into this, but it's just upsetting to know that time and time again, you have California voters being scammed out of their money. Good-hearted people who want to help the homeless, who want to do right by them, fall for the same traps over and over again, repeatedly. They get the same results, and then you basically have to rely on random reporters or people who host news shows in order to cover this information. It doesn't make the national media. It doesn't even make a lot of the local news stations, who again, just a couple of weeks ago were doing a Project Homekey success story on their channel because they haven't caught on to the graft yet. They haven't caught on to the scam. And that's really where I want to leave it today. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute madness in California's homeless services. Till next time.